Alrighty, we're back in another location this time. I remember last time that we recorded this, I was at a different spot here as well.
He's the digital nomad.
The digital nomad coming from an undisclosed location in the woods, we'll say, the mountains.
That, that's awesome though. That's cool that you can. I mean, honestly, if you work from home, you can work from wherever, right? If you have the
Exactly.
capacity to do so and the setup, and you're gonna be out there for a couple of months, which is dope. Like that's an option I did not have 10 years ago. Because it just wasn't culturally accepted from a work perspective. The opportunity just wasn't there. So that's cool, man. Living life.
Exactly. And knock on wood, Wi-Fi has been great, but I did see that Starlink just dropped a Starlink Mini, and apparently it's $50 a month for
Yeah.
the service. So I'm like, yo, if anything goes wrong, I'm definitely getting a Starlink Mini.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea for a backup. I mean, I was joking around with Ricardo that when my internet bill goes up here, um, I'm just going to get Starlink from home. I mean, you can try it out for 30 days to see how well it works. I think it'd be fine for where I live because we're a pretty commercial area. But it's like, might as well just do
Why
that.
not? Yeah.
For sure. So,
Well,
yeah, I know
cool.
we only
Let's
have a short amount of time today to kind of do a sprint through. So maybe we call it like a sprint episode. But yeah, totally don't know what we're going to talk about really. So, Trevor, let's just jump into it. What do you, let's just do it off the cuff here.
So I wanted to, so we've mentioned before some and I don't necessarily like I don't think so on the podcast, but just like in our like one-off conversations, how you and Ricardo are thinking about services and service design, and you've mentioned a couple like interesting things to me. I thought that would be an interesting topic of a conversation, and mainly because one, I think people would get some value out of, and I thought it was really interesting talking about like some of like the publicly traded company pages that you guys are focused on, so, like stuff like that. Um, but I think everybody in this day and age, or like in this moment, is like AI, AI, AI. It's going to take our entire business away from us. Should we not do like Google search ads anymore? Should we be thinking about something else? Should we be standing up an AI focused agency, etc.? So I feel like just general service offering is on a lot of people's minds in this like SEO, paid media kind of landscape where a lot of people are like, dude, I don't know if this is going to be around in a couple of years. Should we be shifting things? How should we be thinking about services? I felt like it was kind of like a timely episode here.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And anybody that's running an agency or a consultancy, typically what we've been selling in the past, it's mostly around marketing, right? You're doing their paid ads, their SEO, their email marketing, um, even organic social media. So just kind of looking down the line in the future. I mean, any marketing clients, specifically, like, I mean, there's got to be like a tier here of like how volatile and also rewarding a client can be from a monetary perspective. There's kind of a correlation there, and also how long they might stay with you. So, for example, so I can articulate that better, I could probably draw this out in a map better. It's like a graph, but there is a correlation. It's like paid media, right? Typically, they pay really well. They can be very lucrative from a monetary standpoint, but also they're going to be very demanding on time, right? And so there's a scale there that happens, and also they don't necessarily. I mean, you can do long-term contracts from a business perspective, but typically they stop doing paid media. It'll be pretty rapid that they cut budgets, right? Just like overnight. And so there's kind of that volatility. So you kind of put paid there. Maybe underneath that, you got SEO, where that is more of a long-term investment. So that's something where they may not, if they're thinking about maybe canceling or moving in a different direction, it's going to take a couple months for them to figure that out. And maybe depending on your fees, it's maybe around the same as paid, maybe a little bit lower, just depending on how you kind of do things. So it's kind of like it's a little bit of an easier client from a as far as they should be around a little bit longer because they're not going to cancel right away. Email is probably actually a step up above, maybe underneath, maybe it's so reactionary and you have to get things out and there's a cadence with it, especially if you got campaign sends, etc. So yeah, the whole point here is like a lot of the marketing stuff, it's like service generated, and there's just a direct correlation of like the more they pay, more likely the more time that they're going to need. And also, inversely, they could go away tomorrow, possibly. And that's a tough one to like when you're scaling out your business. Like, what kind of mix of clients do you want to do? And then you throw AI in here. Are those services are going to be around in 3 or 4 years? So, what other things should we be thinking about? So that's kind of the general scope. I think that helps paint the picture of the scenario that you're talking about. Correct?
Tot- totally. And I think something that you said, so just so I understand, between, let's say, like you're running an agency and you're thinking about paid campaigns, you're thinking about email and SEO. Are you
Yeah.
saying that like a paid service might be a bit like you've I think you've referenced this before, like a sticky service, like a bit more sticky for a client running paid and email versus SEO? There's more longevity there.
So I actually think when I say sticking, it's more like how long they're going to stay on, and also how could they cancel the campaign rather quickly. And typically, paid in email, um, they get to cancel the service pretty quickly based on performance. Where SEO, it takes a little bit longer for them to
For
do that.
sure.
So that's a little bit more of what I would call stickier in a sense of if you had to
Got it.
divide that. If okay, what's more stickier, paid or SEO? SEO typically, and that's just because from a results perspective, it takes time. Paid, if you don't perform well, they're probably not going to stick around. But if
Oh,
you're
for
crushing
sure.
it every single month, then sure they're going to stay around. But I don't really call that stickiness. You know, you have to always perform, and you can't control that all the time.
Got it.
Market conditions. So that's where I'm kind of going with that. Um, I am thinking of other ways to generate revenue as a business in a sense where there's kind of twofold. Just like let's take AI away from it for a moment and just pretend that AI is not around. It's not going to take all of our jobs in 3 years. What other services could you provide that are maybe a little bit more stickier based on how things are going? One is organic social media. I always kind of discounted that as a really good service line to get into, but I do think that's very very sticky, especially nowadays with I mean, I guess it does involve AI because is it SEO is becoming more difficult, paid is becoming more difficult. I and they maybe be threatened like, are they going to be using search engines as much? But organic or social media seems like it's always going to be around, right? So it seems pretty what's it called, everlong, evergreen type of service
Evergreen.
where like
Yep.
Meta's not going anywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, depending, they're not really going anywhere. So like doing organic social media for a client, you know, it's interesting too because they're not really based on results. A lot of times, it's more the results are just like producing the content and the conversation. It's not like, hey, did you grow our social media? I mean, sure, there are some of that, but it's a little bit different. It's more of like just producing the assets. Like, hey, we're doing your social media and we're interacting with you. It's kind of like blogging for a client, same kind of thing. They're not really concerned how well it performs per se. It's more that we got it done, and if it did perform, then it's kind of a side benefit. So I do think like there's organic social media mix could be something pretty lucrative and safe for the future.
So I think you hit on, and I'm just making a note here. I think you hit on a component too that I feel like I left out off the start of why I was also thinking about this service design. Is it's just the fact of the matter, SEO and paid are getting more difficult. Obviously more on the SEO side, but I could say on like the paid side of things, you got to think like we just went through the whole iOS 14.5 update where every app you open be like, do you want to be tracked on others? Like 90% of people said no to that. All these privacy updates with all of these different browsers and cookies being removed, the amount of advertisers in the space, bot traffic, like you can go on and on. All these different social media platforms that are out there, people's attention spans, distrust in big tech companies and and engaging with ads. Like there's so many different reasons why it's getting more difficult, but that's just a fact of the matter that producing results for your clients in SEO and paid search or paid
Yeah,
social,
result
it's
driven.
not nearly as easy as it once was. And that's why I kind of like the
Yeah.
service design conversation with like what is sticky. And you hit on a point there with organic social that I think our agency is really trying to think of how can we unlock something that this is going to sound bad, but like isn't performance driven. Like, can you have a
Sure.
service that like sure there's a performance component to it, but like do you want to go all in and say, hey, we're a paid search agency when that's extremely performance driven and it's only getting more difficult and we don't know what the future of search is going to look like. Now, I think search makes a ton of sense because there's the entire world is conditioned to, hey, we need to rank on search engines and paid search can help get us there quickly. So paid and SEO are great services to get clients in the door and can lead to tangential like projects within that. But I think that's another component that we've really been thinking about is like in the marketplace, it's only getting more difficult to produce results. Are there other services that are related that might be a bit stickier here? And you mentioned organic social as one of those, and I think that's such a smart point. Um, Brands are always going to need
Yeah, and
social. We talked about zero click a bunch. You're always going to need to have a presence on social, and like it is a little bit of guessing game of like is this working or not. So I think there's a lot of longevity to that service there.
yeah, and it's interesting. You talk about zero click. What is it? Rand and SEMrush just came out with a study about how many, like when someone searches on Google,
I would love to know
how many
how they collect
actually.
that data. It's they got it from
Yeah, they have.
Datos, a SEMrush company. It's like what is it, Click Funnel or Click Channels or something? Click Funnel data or something like that.
Yeah, it's Datos and
Click
it's
Streams.
SEMrush. Um, yeah. So I'm just pulling up the stats right now, where it's like, yeah, 41% of someone that searches on Google of those searches, 41% actually click on something. So 60% is then another search or a zero click, they call it, right? They just stop their session. So it's like, okay, great. So we're only taking like 40% of the pie, it's coming in, which is interesting.
And
And then
paid
of
only
that, I
gets
guess the
1% of
breakdown.
that pie.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that it's only 1%, and he kind of explains why that's a little bit of a weird way of looking at it. But still, let's say it's even 10%, that would still surprise me that it's there. And so it's like it does show the value of like SEO long term. Like, hey, because of those clicks, what 70% are organic, and then what is it, like 20, whatever the math is, yeah, 29% are some sort of Google property, and then
Like
1% is
maps
paid. So
or
it's kind of showing
image
SEO
it.
still has
Yeah.
value, but it's like it's the search part, right? Yeah, and so it kind of goes back to, well, let's just pretend there's not a search engine, right? I mean, I get it. If you're a paid guy and you only want to do paid, then you kind of have to put all your chips in and say, this is what we do, and we're face forward with that. And it's probably performance, which you got to do, right? Like, you kind of have to do it. If you're kind of having a well rounded, if it's more of an agency, a lot of different service lines, I mean, you could have a portfolio of services where you split this up. Where like, hey, we know we're going to have our high end marketing clients that are going to demand a lot of time. They're going to be a lot of money from a monthly revenue perspective, but also like, hey, let's also have another base of clients that are not as high touch, maybe with a sticky service line that we know that they're going to be there long term. So you're kind of hedging your bets a little bit on how you do it, and you're having it's kind of like when you're doing portfolio for stock trading, right? You could, or if you're doing, your 401k, it's like there's a reason why you can have a mix of portfolio of
Yep.
certain stocks. So it's like you could have like a portfolio that's super aggressive, and then you have other ones that are long-term bonds or something that are super conservative. And so I think on the very far spectrum of something that would be very conservative on from a sticky perspective, like super sticky but not as much price point, is more of the service that we do offer, um, is like webmaster services for clients. Like, hey, you need hosting. Not the hosting is part of it, but it's like webmaster service. You need changes on your site, uploading images, etc. And it's like a lot of times there's not going to be a bunch of requests each month, right? And our monthly fee for it is going to be a lot lower compared to a marketing client. But also the client, they're not, what's the performance there, right? Did you get the work done in a timely manner, right? And so that's also something we have been starting to do a bit more of, is just kind of have that nest egg of revenue coming in from that lower monthly recurring revenue client, but not as high touch per se. From as far as like performance, it's still pretty high touch as far as how we manage it per se, but it's not a lot of, I guess, time. in comparison. So that's also something that can be thinking about, is like webmaster services. It's still needed. And I think it's needed even more these days based on how many sites that have been built in Shopify or WordPress. They're pretty customized now to where, especially like a WordPress platform, where it's like, eh, it's as good as the developers when they build it. Did they actually build the back end of the site user friendly, so people could edit it? And I would say 75% of the websites that we run into, you need a developer to go in and modify a WordPress site just because the coding up front was lazy. So that's our advantage in that situation.
I think that's one of those that like really got my wheels spinning when we started working together and there was this webmaster service. You guys do a fantastic job. Not just saying that, you guys really do a great job of like making updates to the site, being very quick with it, and then being very communicative to let clients know of Loop, like, hey, we did these things. But that really got me thinking, like, you could have a smaller retainer, and a business is always going to need a website. They're always going to need a place to send people to get in contact with their business. It's never going to go away unless we end up doing some like Zuckerberg virtual reality world, which I
Virtual
don't see happening
metaverse.
anytime
Yeah.
soon. Like,
Yeah.
so they're always going to need website hosting. They're always going to need website security, and they're always going to need website updates. And if you have people that can deliver, like, you could have clients for 10 years and they never really even notice, or like think about performance or anything like that. And dude, you could have a massive business just based off of like a lot of this like recurring revenue. I also
Yeah. A lot of
think
people
so. I
kind
think
of.
that
Oh, good.
no, no, you go.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, a lot of times people think of it mostly around hosting. They kind of start with like, "Hey, I host your website." Like my uncle, he has like a printing business, and like I asked him like, "Well, who hosts your website?" He's like, "I don't know." Like this guy that I've worked with for 10 years, and he's kind of slow to get back to me on edits, etc. And I'm like, hey, we could look into doing that too. But it kind of starts off as hosting. But hosting, honestly, everybody's just reselling someone else's hosting provider, and there's actually not a lot of margin in that. It's the
Yeah,
actual services
yeah.
of updating the site, etc. That's important, and it's like, yeah, I think that like webmaster services stuff, people think they can just kind of skimp on that. Um, from a service perspective, they might seek a lower cost solution, going through Upwork or something like that, which can work per se, but the quality that you're going to get back is just not there. So I guess we're like more of a higher end, but not the highest end, you would say, because the fees aren't crazy, of that service. Because like, hey, you send us an email, you're going to get a response back, like, hey, acknowledged, got it, get it done, we're working on it. Like you said, we're very communicative in the process, where I think a lot of people are not. And that's okay as long as you build like the framework around how to do it. It doesn't take more time on our end to be communicative. It's just
I
process.
I think that's a really good point there. Like, I definitely don't want me to come across as like, hey, you could get away with something for like a service where like you have to do good work. You have to like actually be able and be competent and be timely with your responses. So there's definitely like that component to it, but also thinking about some things that are a bit more evergreen. Clients need them, and it's going to be recurring and might not necessarily be performance based. Another one that really comes to mind would be like, if you're in this space, analytics and reporting, like that's
Yeah.
something that we're thinking about and we're trying to iron out a little bit further. But like, you could see a world where, a client just wants to know what happened on my website this month and like, why did things change? Why did they get worse or why did they get better? You could easily have a service where you just have like a dashboard management, and maybe you're writing insights or maybe you're not writing insights at all, and you're just kind of similar to a webmaster service. If somebody needs an update to your site, bang, we'll update your site every month. We got you covered. Similar on the or analytics side, if something breaks within reporting, you're there to fix it. If there's a new functionality to the site that needs to be tracked, you're there to implement that tracking. Like, there's always
Yeah.
something that gets updated on the site. There's always something that needs to get tweaked reporting wise. Like, there's always something there to be fixed. It's like constantly moving. I think that's another one that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So Trevor, I mean, the analytics side, like it is a whole another service line, of like getting up tracking, maintaining tracking. And I think it's very valid to do. I think pricing it and showing value to clients, that's going to be interesting. I do know a couple contractors that we worked like specifically one that he was just doing some side hustle work, and then eventually he had enough work to where he branched off into his completely own consultant services, and it's just purely analytics. So he's like my go-to high-end analytics guy now, and he charges as he should for his high-end work to do so, and it's important to do. And I think people can see the value in it, just kind of selling it. And how do you get those clients? That would be kind of interesting to see. But it's like, is it a project, or can you get like some sort of a lower maintenance fee to kind of have the reporting that's there? But I think there's also something else that's here that I can't figure out how to sell it. It's something I've talked to Ricardo about. I maybe mentioned it to you before, where um, it's almost like you set up reporting for them. You don't even have to be in charge of, like, let's say from like a service line, like setting up all the reporting as far as tracking. You could have like an other analytics person doing that, but like a simple marketing dashboard, right? And so and then a client gets this dashboard, but then we just send them like an executive summary of what's going on and what we're seeing, because we're very seasoned in how we look at accounts, and we can look at the overall traffic. Like, hey, we saw this dip, we saw this increase. Your mobile traffic conversion rate went down. Like, these observations were like people kind of need, um, and sell that as a monthly service. And then if they need something fixed, well, we more than likely have a solution or a partner that could do it. It's kind of like a CMO, like a
Like business
kind of ish, but it's
intelligence,
like a,
kind of business insights.
yeah, it's kind of like a business intelligence, but it's not like overblown. We're not really in charge of it. You're kind of more reactive of like what's going on. Like, I could see that as a value for like a client to say, hey, you're an e-commerce shop or lead gen, whatever, and you kind of have someone else's look at the data and their thoughts every month on it, and then they could provide solutions if needed. I just don't know how to sell that, or what that is, or how you get that across in the marketplace as a need, because people need it.
We're
I
definitely,
just one of those things that they just don't know that they need it.
I know, we're definitely trying to like think through that one a bit more. But I think that one's interesting because you're always going to want to know as an executive, as a business owner, whoever, what happened, with my business. Like, did we get more revenue from the site? Did we get more leads, and why, and what we can do to get more, or what we can do to course correct? That's always going to be there. And I think that would be an interesting one. Um,
Yeah, it's like a
so I think we
fractional
gave
CMO, but it's not like you're in charge of the marketing. It's more of just like you're showing
exactly.
observations of what you're seeing in the data. But like I wouldn't even mind it for like any of the campaigns that we're running. Like, if I give you a dashboard, you're looking at it. Can you just tell me what you're seeing? Are you seeing the same thing as me?
Exactly.
What are you seeing that's different that we need? Because it's like that concept is there. So I think that could be something else. But just how to sell that, or how to package that as, or productize it, I'm not there yet. So if someone else is out there
Same.
doing it, let me know.
Plus two, you got to also got to think in an AI world, there's going to be like some like general like summaries and stuff like that. Teams are always going to want a human to be like, should we do this? Like, okay, here was our insights and recommendations. Now, what would you do based off of your experience? Would you like launch these campaigns? Would you like? I think there's always going to be a component of that where you're going to need some like kind of human reassurance there. Um, but I feel like we gave like I know we're at time because we do got to jump to a call here, but I feel like we gave like three solid ass examples of potentially sticky services where if you're like in paid organic in an agency and you're thinking about like long term, is SEO and paid going to get disrupted based off of competition, regulations, and just all these other things? I feel like we gave you a couple like ideas and also frameworks to think about what could produce like a long term cash flowing agency that has like longevity and like stability to it.
Yeah, stability is the biggest thing that you're trying to find, and I think it's diversity in the what you offer, but also not being so diverse that you're not an expertise at it. So there's some challenges with that, but yeah, like you said, I think it's a good kind of ideation session for this little sprint.
100%. So if you listen to this far, drop a comment if you have an idea of like a sticky service or any thoughts here. I feel like this could be, I don't know, maybe a reoccurring theme in the show of like kind of how we're thinking about services and offerings and how things are changing. But hopefully this was valuable and helpful. And yeah, we'll catch you back here next week.